Over the last 3 months, I've been in a specific muscle building phase. My goal has been over the course of the last 3 months is basically to build a fuck ton of muscle, or at least as much muscle as I possibly could. Because my goal for 12 months is to do a set of different cycles of building muscle, losing fat, so that I can build as much muscle as possible whilst also staying relatively lean at the same time. Now, at the start of this week, I switched into my fat loss phase. So I thought it would be a nice episode of the podcast to give you an update on my own training and my own nutrition to show you how I'm actually managing those things to achieve that long-term goal. And maybe there's some nuggets of information in here that you can apply into your own training, into your own nutrition regime, so that you can actually achieve a similar goal. Now, let me look at the stats of where I ended up in my muscle building phase. Now, I started probably around, from memory, 82-ish kilos, something like that. And I finished up around about 87, 86.9 to be precise. Now, in reality, that's probably 1 to 3 kilos over where I probably wanted to be, where I targeted. Now, that's for a few different reasons. I think there is some water weight fluctuations in there. I don't think I'd quite established where specific maintenance was before I started going into a calorie surplus, but all that's okay. It's no real big issue for me to have gone to 87 kilos. It doesn't mean I've got a huge amount of body fat to lose I can still achieve what I want to achieve. I've not lost a whole set of abs and all that sort of stuff. So it's all perfectly good. It's not a big issue. At that point as well, I was eating, roughly speaking, 3,500 calories, with my maintenance being roughly 3,100. So probably on any given day, anywhere between a 400 to a 500 calorie surplus. And that is not necessarily a calorie surplus that will be directly applicable to you. That was found through trial and error for me. That was me monitoring specifically my weight trends, and seeing where I needed to push that calorie surplus in order to generate the level of change in body weight that I wanted to make sure that I was progressing forward. So maybe for you, that calorie surplus is 200 calories, 250. It may be more than my 500 calorie surplus. Whatever it is, you need to trial and error and test that process. So now I've switched into an aggressive fat loss phase. Now it's aggressive because I want to achieve that body fat reduction specifically within a 4-week period. I may extend it, but initially in my thought process, it's going to be a 4-week fat loss period, because essentially I'm going to go with 3 months of building muscle, 1 month of losing body fat, and then again do another 4-month block of that, and again another 4-month block of that over the course of a 12-month period. So what I've done now is switched into a calorie deficit of roughly 35%. So 3,100 calories is my maintenance calories. I've switched into a target of 2,000 calories. So that's quite a significant reduction, both in terms of my calorie intake versus my maintenance, but also where I was from a calorie surplus. So imagine I was eating 3,500 calories. I've now instantly dropped 1,500 calories overnight, which is going to have its own impact both psychologically and also in terms of my energy levels and things like that, as I try to adjust to that different level of calories. Now, I get asked sometimes should you ease into a calorie deficit and all those sorts of things? Now, there really is no need. Just switch into whatever calorie deficit feels appropriate to you. Now, the key thing is that an aggressive calorie deficit isn't for everybody. Now, the reason why I feel like an aggressive calorie deficit is good for me is because I have what I call calorie capacity. Now, that calorie capacity means that I've got a BMR that's anywhere, like roughly speaking, 1,800 to 1,900 calories per day. I've got a high level of activity, both in terms of going to the gym, but also my step count is quite high. Therefore, my maintenance at 3,100 gives me a lot of room to reduce calories quite significantly, but also have quite a filling, nutritious, and healthy diet at the same time. It's not like I'm dropping 1,100 calories and my BMR or whatever, my total daily energy expenditure is 1500 calories. I'm not dropping down to 400 calories. I have the capacity to make that change and still have a highly nutritious diet and also feel full. So I won't have huge amounts of hunger. Obviously, there will be some hunger along the way. I'm not immune to that, but it will be manageable to a degree. So I wouldn't necessarily say copy my aggressive calorie deficit. Figure out what is right for you and if you can do something like that. Now, the other question might be, well, Simon, how do you cope against, or how do you battle against muscle loss with such an aggressive calorie deficit? Now, the realistic thing is that I'm not actually very lean right now. Okay, I'm not overweight, I'm not fat, but I'm not hugely lean either. So therefore, an aggressive calorie deficit is absolutely fine for someone in my situation. If you're already very lean, you're quite shredded already, an aggressive calorie deficit is not the way to go. Now, as long as I keep resistance training and I keep having protein, now I probably won't change my protein intake from the 1.8 to 2 grams per kilo I have right now, but actually I could drop as low as like 1 to 1.2 grams per kilo. And as long as I'm resistance training, I'm probably not going to lose any muscle whatsoever. Yes, I might start to look smaller because my glycogen is depleting, so on and so forth. I start to look a little bit smaller, but all of that will start to change when you start to replenish some of that glycogen further down the line. So muscle loss for me right now is not a huge particular issue, but if I get particularly lean, which I don't think would happen in 4 weeks, but let's say, for example, it did, I can always start to increase my calories and still be in a deficit. So if I'm in a 1,100 calorie deficit right now, and I decided that, right, okay, I still want to be in a deficit, but I don't want to be in as aggressive deficit, I could drop to a 500 calorie deficit. Still losing weight, still losing body fat, but not actually doing it in quite such an aggressive manner. Now, in terms of my training, I'm going to maintain my resistance training. The first week of my new program will be a deload week. What I'll be doing is specifically giving my joints a little bit of a break, giving my muscles a little bit of a break, central nervous system a little bit of a break, and allowing some of that fatigue that I was accumulating in the latter part of my training to kind of die down. Because I really pushed the volume hard in the last 4 weeks of my training program and started to feel it. So sleep was getting impacted, recovery was getting impacted, those sorts of things were really affecting me. But that was by design. That little overreaching phase was there by design. But now is the time for me to start to cut back on a little bit of that. And that deload is really going to be something new for me in terms of how I'm going to manage that deload. Normally, what I would have done is half weights, or maybe even just taking a whole week off of the gym. What I'm going to do this time is something slightly different. All I'm going to do is reduce the number of working sets that I'm going to do. That might be just 1 or 2 working sets per exercise. So I'm really cutting down on the volume that I'm doing, but I'm still pushing myself a little bit harder for those particular exercises, those particular sets. Now, is there a rhyme or reason why I'm doing that? Probably not. It just, I think for me, strikes a little bit of a balance between what makes me feel good, but also allows me to work on a little bit of execution, a little bit of form. So I might do, 2 to 3 quote unquote warm-up sets where I focus in on specifically on technique, a lighter weight, focusing on form, making sure I'm executing those exercises best as I can. And then I go for one all-out working set. Again, hugely reducing the volume, reducing the kind of fatigue on the joints and all of that sort of stuff. So that works as my deload period. Then in the following 3 weeks of this cut, then what I will be doing is just a very basic training program. Again, a lot of the exercises that I have been using for my muscle building phase will completely translate over. But what I'll be looking to do is a minimum amount of training volume. I'm not looking to specifically build muscle here because I'm at the stage now where I'm very unlikely to build muscle in a calorie deficit. If you're new or a beginner, you probably could. So again, this wouldn't apply to you. But I'm in a situation where being in a calorie deficit is not conducive to building the most amount of muscle possible. Therefore, what's really the point in pushing volume that hard if that's the situation. So really all I'm interested in is what's the minimum amount of volume I can do in order to maintain form and the muscle that I have. That's what I'm focusing in on. That also then gives me, and it's almost like a semi deload at that point. And then that allows me to really push into the next stage of muscle building, which will come in approximately 4 weeks' time. Finally, what I want to talk about is the psychology of the process, particularly around the nutrition side of things. Because let's say, for example, you are up at a high amount of calories in a calorie surplus, and overnight you've switched that into a calorie deficit, probably or possibly an aggressive calorie deficit at that. You might be feeling hungry, you might be feeling the effects of fatigue, and. Now, the reality is that's probably going to happen. It's going to be difficult for you to switch into a calorie deficit and not feel hungry at some point. But the thing that I would urge you to do is not think like mindlessly about that process. Don't just think, oh, I'm fucking hungry. Oh, this is shit. I'm fucking hungry. Oh, this is crap. And then you're not really doing anything proactive about it. Really think about, when are you feeling hungry? Is it a specific time of day? Now, for me, in the first few days, it was around lunchtime, 2 to 3 hours post-workout. I felt really, really hungry. Now, that is a case of me identifying a specific time of the day where I need some calories. I'm not going to ignore that and just try and use sheer brute force and willpower to try and get through that. What I'm going to do is manipulate what I'm eating throughout the day and when I'm eating it to suit times of the day when I need it most. And that's what you need to do. First point of call is probably to think about, okay, how can I have more like low calorie, high volume foods that are going to make me feel full? And then think about, well, what's the timing of those calories in order to help me feel as satiated, as satisfied as possible? That's going to help that switch from being in a surplus to being in a deficit much more easy. You've got to think about, what are these hunger cues telling you? What is your body telling you about when potentially you need calories more? And don't blindly just ignore that. Think about, okay, what do I need to do? What do I need to adjust? What do I need to manage? How can I make this work for me in this particular situation? And that's what's going to help you get you through that sort of thing. When it comes to the training side of things, that should just be like relatively easy. I mean, the fact that you're deloading should be quite cool. The fact that you're not necessarily have to smash yourself in the gym all the time. Some people find that difficult to adjust to, but really resting and recovering is part of the process. It enables you to push harder in the next phase. So if you're thinking long term about building the most amount of muscle possible, you should really be trying to actively look for these deload weeks. And if you've done things right, when you are pushing yourself and you are kind of maybe in this overreaching phase at the end of your building muscle period, you should probably be begging for a fucking deload week rather than trying to actively avoid one. If you are pushing yourself to the point where fatigue is high and you're pushing the training volume and the intensity to the max for that last little bit of a push towards the end of your muscle building phase, then you should probably be really screaming for a deload if you've done it right. So that's what I'm kind of doing right now. So for the course of October, that's what I'll be doing. I'll be focusing on this fat loss phase and then switching into another muscle building phase. So hopefully you found this useful. Hopefully maybe there's some tips and tricks and things that you want to use and utilize in your own training and your own nutrition. But remember, this is all very specific to me. Really where you're trying to make the most amount of progress is the personalization. If you try and copy what I do, you'll probably fall short for various different reasons. Maybe you haven't got the calorie capacity to do an aggressive calorie deficit. Maybe you struggle with being in dieting phases and therefore sticking to an aggressive calorie deficit is just not the right option for you, and so on and so on and so on. So you've got to really think about A, what I'm saying, and B, does it directly apply to you, or do you need to modify it to make it work for you? But hopefully you did take something out of it. If you did, let me know.